This is the third in our series of presentations on speed reading. In the first two, we were looking at ways of reading strategically to reduce the amount of work that we have to do. This means that we are reading more effectively, more efficiently. We are, in essence, speeding up our reading. But of course, there is actually a way to improve the number of words that we read per minute, and that's what this presentation is going to focus on. So when we traditionally think of speed reading, we think of somebody reading, Harry Potter in 4.5 hours. That's not really what we're talking about when we're thinking about an academic book. You simply cannot move through ideas, through theories, through data, through equations in that way. So what speed reading is, when we're talking about speed reading in an academic sense, is we're not reading for full comprehension. This is just one of a number of tools to help us select the material that we do need to spend more time on. As we've said numerous times, when we read academically, we shouldn't start on the very first page and give equal attention to every single page and then finish on the last page. It's about dipping in and selecting what we need for our particular purpose to help move our understanding on or to strengthen an argument. Now, there'll always be a number of barriers to reading quickly. This might be because we're struggling to understand the language, we struggle to read words on the page, it might be that the vocabulary is challenging or the content is challenging, but there are also a number of habits that we pick up when we learn to read that mean that we read more slowly. And one of those is subvocalization. So this is hearing the words in our head, and most of us will do that. Now, this really aids comprehension. And if you're finding a text quite difficult to read silently, read it aloud. Find a space where you can read it aloud, and that will often help you go through each word and understand it in a particular context. However, if you're looking to speed up your reading, then getting rid of subvocalization is one of the best things that we can do. Just seeing the words, and actually our brain will still take them in even without hearing that little internal commentary. We might also find that our eyes drift across the page. It's really difficult to stay focused on what we're reading. Sometimes we skip back to a previous section, maybe because we didn't understand it, but maybe because our brain just wants to double check something. Sometimes we skip forward, particularly if text is broken up. We might flick ahead across to a header or an image or a table of figures. And another reason that we often read slowly are fixations and regressions. So this is pausing on individual words and also going back and reading them again, which is slightly different to drifting. So this is a visualization of what those pauses, those fixations and regressions look like. So if we read every single word and we pause on every word that we read, we might be pausing 12 times on a line. There might be an average of 12 words per line, so we're pausing 12 times. If we then make a few regressions and go back and read a few words previously and then reread them again, we might be pausing 15 or 18 times in a line. If we can reduce the number of fixations we make, so we actually read 2 or 3 words grouped together at a time, then we might only be pausing 3 or 4 times on a line. Now, if each pause is half a second, you can see very quickly how this is going to reduce the amount of time it takes to read a particular line in a text. So this idea of reading several words at a time sort of challenges our understanding of how we might comprehend a text. Our assumption might be that the slower we read, the more we understand. But this is quite a good example of splitting up words. If we split up words, actually those pauses make it quite difficult for us to understand a sentence. Here, speed reading has been found to be better for understanding than slow reading. It has been argued that by reading more quickly, we can actually speed up our comprehension because our brain can take in more information when it's delivered in meaningful chunks. So here we're just pausing 5 times on each group of words, and actually that means that we put each word into context rather than reading each word separately and then at the very end having to apply that context retrospectively. So in addition to chunking, it can be quite helpful to introduce some tools to help you move through a text more quickly. We mentioned already about our eyes sort of drifting, that we might sort of go back to material that we've already read. So it's useful to sometimes introduce a piece of card or paper if you're reading a printed book, and you can just slowly cover up the material that you've already read. And if you keep it moving at quite a steady speed, that keeps you moving on through the text. Again, remember, we're not reading for full comprehension here. We're scanning and skimming the material to see where we do need to focus our energy and attention. If you're doing this on a screen, then it can be quite helpful to just scroll down on your mouse to keep moving down through the text. Establish a sort of rhythm, perhaps in line with those sort of bounces upon the line when we were chunking up the text. Again, it stops your eye flicking back up to material that you've already looked at. Another useful thing can be to introduce some sort of pointer. Now, when we learn to read as children, we quite often use our finger to look at each word, and that helps us stay focused on what we're looking at. In the case of academic reading, it's better to use something thinner than a finger, maybe a knitting needle or a skewer or a thin pencil. Your hand can kind of get in the way of the text. But if you use some sort of pointer, it keeps you moving, it keeps you focused, it stops your eye drifting. So you could either drag it down the page, that performs a sort of similar function to the card. You can sweep it across the page. Now, if your eye follows the point of that needle or skewer, then this is a way of moving through the text more quickly. The hop will recreate that sort of chunking idea. If you hop 3 or 4 times per line, that's going to force your eye to take in those 2 or 3 words that are either side of your pointer at a time and stop you looking at each word separately, so therefore reduce the number of fixations on a particular text. And then the zigzag, and this is what we might think of when we think of people moving through text at speed. Again, not about comprehension, but looking for keywords. So if you're looking for a particular bit of information, you're looking for when an author mentions particular keywords, that's a really good way of keeping you moving at speed and not digressing and getting caught up in reading the text in any more detail.